Welcome to Fandom Sage Powers, where we discuss comics, heroes, villains, siblings. Today we're going to look at the Summers family, specifically the three Summers boys. Stick around to the end, where I discuss my future desires for these characters in the MCU. Here we go. In the world of X-Men, there are many characters, some way more popular than others, like, for instance, Cyclops, Scott Summers. Everybody knows Scott. He's the leader of the X-Men, arguably the most famous X-Men ever. And he has a younger brother. His name is Alex, Havok. You may know him. A number of people probably do from the movies. In First Class, he was introduced instead of Cyclops being the main Summers brother. But did you know that there is a third Summers brother? Some may not be as familiar with this brother because he hasn't been quite mainstream just yet, but he was featured in X-Men 97's episode 6 as a member of the Shi'ar Imperial Guard, which was interesting. So I'm going to touch on these Summers brothers and their unique family history and what brought them all together, ways they are similar, and what ways they are vastly different. Scott and Alex's backstory is tragic, as well as their younger brother, who we'll talk about later. And even in a tragic sense of other superheroes, it's kind of high on the list. While the boys were on a plane with their parents, Christopher and Catherine Summers, it was attacked by a Shi'ar spacecraft. And in order to save their sons, Christopher strapped them into a parachute, and unfortunately there was only one harness, but he had to push them out of the plane. Catherine and Christopher watched in horror as the parachute caught on fire, but they had little time to worry about it because their plane soon exploded and seemingly killed them both. But more on that later. The parachute did catch on fire, causing a rapid descent. Alex got injured pretty badly, and Scott also injured himself with head trauma. It would be years and they were separated, not seeing each other, with Alex in the hospital and eventually getting sent to a separate orphanage, and Scott going to live in an orphanage that's secretly run by Mr. Sinister, and eventually being found by Charles Xavier when his powers began to manifest. Cyclops' power allows him to expel a powerful beam of destructive concussive energy from his eyes. And for clarification, Cyclops' optic beams are not heat-based or a laser. The energy itself is classified as exotic, but it produces concussive force like a physical object would. And I read a question that was a really good question, that why things melt when the optic blast is used on it or catch on fire, and that's just because of friction. When something's moving really fast and strikes something, or continuously striking something, friction and heat is a byproduct of that reaction. Unfortunately, he is unable to control this power naturally, so he needs the help of a visor made of ruby quartz or some kind of glasses or lenses. Without the aid of these ruby lenses or visor, he can control his eye beams by simply closing his eyes or narrowing his gaze to a smaller field of destruction so he can make wider beams or smaller, precise strikes. Ideally, his visor is his best accessory when he's using his powers because he can have the most control over how much energy he's outputting and the area of effect and overall precision. His body is constantly absorbing ambient energy from his environment and wherever he is. The solar energy, radio waves, biokinetic energy from people's bodies. Like, he's constantly kind of taking little bits of energy. So his power, he is able to sustain using his power for long periods of time. And without being fatigued or really like breaking down at all, as long as he's conscious, he's able to continue using his powers. Another aspect of Scott's powers is his amazing spatial acuity and his spatial awareness. It's quite uncanny. He can ricochet his optic beams off multiple surfaces to strike multiple enemies simultaneously. He is a master at geometry trajectories. This makes him a phenomenal strategist on the field of battle. He has a perception of seeing the world from a bird's eye view, looking down on the battlefield to see different strategies and different ways to move. This is an aspect of his power that is often overlooked, but it cannot be understated that he can judge distance and depth perception. All those types of things come to him instantly to gauge where to strike and when to pause. And it's almost equivalent to a spider sense of sorts that he is able to gauge this type of information very quickly in his mind. While Scott was being one of the original 5 X-Men and, having his adventures, eventually his brother began manifesting his mutant powers, and he caught the attention of some unsavory types, namely the Living Pharaoh, aka the Living Monolith. This gentleman was a scientist who at first was just an archaeologist from Egypt, but he discovered some ancient relic called the Stone, which gave him superhuman powers and transformed him into the Living Monolith. As a Living Monolith, he could absorb cosmic radiation, and see where I'm going with this? So he was after Alex because he has very similar powers. He could make himself stronger. Luckily, the X-Men were able to intervene, and Alex would go on to recover with the X-Men and join the X-Men as well. And he wanted to be a part of this team, but he struggled a little bit to find his place because he was basically playing second banana to Scott, who was so prominent within the X-Men. It's hard to live in the shadow of somebody who is so awesome like that, but he did his best. But he has ultimately a different style of doing things, and he's much more free-spirited. He's not as rigid and as strict as Scott, and he's not as sure of himself when it comes to his powers as Scott either, which is another thing. But Alex has the ability to absorb cosmic radiation, starlight, and he releases those energies once he's absorbed them out into concentric circles of heated plasma from his body and usually along his arms. He had to learn after a time how to control this power because it would radiate in all directions if he wasn't careful and cause some really bad damage. Once he learned how to channel it in certain directions or how to decrease output and regulate, he got a lot better and a lot more confident. I often describe both Scott and Alex as 2 very different types of law enforcement. Scott would be very much SWAT, CIA, or SEAL Team 6, very elite, precision type of officer, whereas Alex would probably be more like a federal marshal or a bounty hunter of some sort or something like that, somebody that likes things a little bit more fast and loose. He does better in those type of situations. Not that he can't do that structure, but it's just more fun for him and the readers, I think, when he's in more looser type of situations than what Scott likes. So where does the third brother come in, you ask? Catherine and Christopher Summers' plane exploded after they pushed their sons out of it with a burning parachute, and are thought to have perished, but they didn't. They were actually transported onto that Shi'ar ship. They probably wished they had died instead because what they went through afterwards was pretty horrendous. Torture and abuse. Catherine, being pregnant, would be murdered by Dekin, and her unborn child died. But when Christopher escaped after that with some other inmates and formed the Starjammers, intergalactic group of pirates, he vowed to make Dekin's life a living hell, and he did everything in his power to do that for revenge for his wife and his child. But little did he know that the child was actually extracted from her womb and placed in an incubation chamber and later a maturation chamber because the Shi'ar do have technology to accelerate growth of organisms. So he was matured to adolescence in, a year, something really extreme to that nature. He was brainwashed, he was indoctrinated, and he was made into a servant, a slave, and was sent to work with Eric the Red, who was an operative for the Shi'ar, a spy on Earth. During this time that Gabriel would escape and try to get away from Eric the Red. He was luckily found by Moira McTaggart, who nursed him to health and tried to help him as best she could. Gabriel, he knew his name, but that was about it. He didn't remember what happened to him, where he came from. Eventually, he would come to get better and come into his own and meet some other young people, other young mutants on Muir Island. Charles Xavier would meet him and immediately recognize that Gabriel was a Summers from his psychic imprint, which is very familiar. So he thought it was very fascinating and very curious that this Gabriel Summers appeared to be older than both Scott and Havok, but was younger mentally. But he kept all this to himself. He didn't share this with anybody else, put that in his back pocket. Turns out years later, he wouldn't use that card because the original 5 X-Men were captured and trapped on the island of Krakoa. Their first encounter with Krakoa was not a good one. He asked Moira to borrow her students for an important mission. Reluctantly, Moira agreed. Petra, who could control the Earth, she was like a geokinetic earthbender. You have a girl named Sway, who could control time and manipulate time to a degree, like slow things down or speed things up around a certain area. You had Darwin, who we all know now, that could adapt to survive in just about any situation. And you had Vulcan, or Gabriel Summers, able to channel, absorb, redirect, and repurpose energy for a number of things like flight, making barriers, things of that nature, firing off blasts. Now, it's important to keep in mind that Gabriel is not super powerful at this time. So Gabriel was a pretty average strength mutant with his powers. Charles Xavier, he mentally trained these 4 novice rookie X-Men trainees into ready-to-go soldiers in like 3 hours. He made them feel like they had 4 months of training by doing this telepathically to them. And he sent them to the island. They were able to get Cyclops. They sent him on their jet off the island because he was injured and weak, but Cyclops witnessed them getting killed as he took off the island attacked. This is a mission that was really retconned into the X-Men history because Charles Xavier erased this portion of history from all involved, even Moira. The island was really trying to get Gabriel, and he saw him as a threat. Petra was killed, as well as Sway, and they both released their last bit of their mutant energies to try to protect Darwin and Vulcan. They all were buried beneath this island. Polaris would launch this Krakoan island into space, into orbit, and it would float around the Earth. Unbeknownst to everybody else, Darwin had turned himself in energy and bonded to Vulcan to save both of their lives, and they remained kind of dormant, inert, in Krakoa, floating around. So years later, a little thing called M-Day happened. The Scarlet Witch erasing mutant powers, bringing them back. It was a crazy thing. So a lot of energies were being transferred and moving around the atmosphere, and this interacted with Darwin and Vulcan as well as Krakoa. And this is what triggered their awakening. Vulcan made his way back to Earth. Now, at this point, we see that Vulcan has increased power. This is what gave him his Omega level status, was the energies of M-Day and those mutant powers that kind of boosted his, as well as Darwin's interaction with him and being bonded to him. Vulcan, Gabriel Summers, was pissed. And Gabriel Summers is probably one of the worst attitudes in Marvel Comics. Like, his personality sucks. And it's well written, it's very compelling, and he is a great villain. But wow, he came out with a vengeance when he came into the scene and the pages of Deadly Genesis. So his story is very tragical. It's very messed up. So you can kind of feel for him, but at the same token, he's really dangerous and he's very extreme and very much a megalomaniac. So he has lost his damn mind. He hates Charles Xavier. He is mad at Scott. He's just mad at everything, and he's lashing out. He wants Charles Xavier to confess to what he did, and he does confront him in front of everybody. After this, they are able to kind of rebuff Vulcan by separating Darwin from him and kind of weakened him and threw him off, but he flew off planet right towards the Shi'ar Empire because he had some more vengeance to dole out. And he would go on to kill Daken, kill Corsair, and he got into a whole thing called the War of the Kings, and Black Bolt and the Inhumans got involved. It was a whole mess. So his lasting legacy on the X-Men universe is pretty impactful. He has been a huge villain, actually. And it's interesting that we got this character introduced later in the X-Men's publication. Now, Cyclops is a straight-laced Boy Scout, and we know this. He is by the books, or generally speaking, his first iterations and his well-known iterations are more of that. As well as Alex being a little different in that he's more of a free spirit. He does things more fast and loose. I think he does better in less structured situations and more antics like Mutant X in that book series, because it was a little bit more edgy. So that's where they're different, but they're both very much heroes and they're very much brothers. They butt heads because Havok does play second banana to Scott, but he respects him and he still looks up to him. And Vulcan is just a wild card and he's one of the scariest ones out there. He's a really scary villain. So as I was making this video, I was reminiscing back on X-Men cartoons and movies, and I realized we have never even got 2 Summers brothers in the same movie yet. But I believe there is a high likelihood that we could get all 3 of these characters in the MCU. So I thought of a few actors that I think could really nail these roles. Tell me what you think. Jacob Elordi for Cyclops. He has a great jawline to play a character that has to have half of his face covered for pretty much the whole time he's on screen. And he happens to be a great actor as well. Finn Cole from Peaky Blinders and Animal Kingdom. He's an awesome actor. I really like him a lot. And Finn Wittrock, another Finn on the list. He is a gentleman from American Horror Story. Originally, I wanted this role to go to Zachary Quinto. Years ago, I used to think about it. But Wittrock, he reminds me a lot of Zachary Quinto from American Horror Story. So that's where that idea came from. If this is your first time here joining me, please feel free to subscribe. And for those of you who are returning, thank you so much for your continued support. Jump in the comments below. Tell me about anything you're thinking about, any topics you might want to discuss in the future. All right? So if you like this video, give me a thumbs up, and I will see you in the next video.